Hi, I'm Beth Bonness, host of the Thought Echoes podcast, where we explore how we engage with our thoughts and appreciate their ripple effects and entanglements, especially with those we love and interact with the most. In this episode, I'm joined by poet Robin Gabbert, who shares how writing becomes a way to process the moments we don't always choose but can't ignore. Her work invites us to slow down, pause a moment, and make meaning from inside the ecosystems of our lives. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, Robin. It is so nice to get a chance to meet you in person, and I'm looking forward to talking all things poetry with you, with April as being Poetry Month. So, can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this book?
Well, thank you, Beth, for inviting me to be here for Poetry Month. And my book, Somehow I Haven't Drowned, um, was inspired by a number of things. It's basically something I've been working on for about 5 years. As you know, I have two prior books. Um, the Clandestine Life of Paintings and Poems, and that's in a book of ekphrastic poetry. And then I also have Diary of a Mad Poet, and that was written not long after the 2017 wildfires, but here in Sonoma County, where I lost my home. So that was in 2017. So after that was book was published in 2020, I started working on writing other poetry, and it's largely, and what I guess over the course of those 5 years, a number of themes emerged in my writing. Um, and if you look at the poems in the book, they're in some ways about survival, not surviving the fire like I did in 2017, but about going through difficult times and coming out stronger. And actually, some of those times were during my childhood, as you can see from reading the poems in the books. One of those was abuse by my stepfather. Uh, not something that's pleasant, but it was a theme that kept emerging in my writing. And I was kind of surprised by that, actually. I was surprised that when I would sit down to write, it would just take me over. And it was obviously somewhere in my subconscious, and I would have to write about it. So that was one of the themes that is in the chapter that's called Whirlpool. And that's why I give a trigger warning in that chapter that warns people if you don't want to know anything about that, or if that kind of theme would upset you, just skip that chapter. That's one of, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 chapters in the book, but some people might relate to that. So some of it was cathartic. One of the reasons was to get that particular topic off my chest, I guess you could say. And I hoped I would be done with it, and I feel like I am. I feel like I've written through that part of my um, my psyche. And then there are a lot of other kinds of poems in the book too, other kinds of themes about family and about love, lost love. I've been married 3 times, so there are poems about all my different relationships, and so all the things that people write about in their life. And um, I was very close to my grandmother. There's poetry about her, and as you know, I like to write ekphrastic poetry, which is poetry written to art. And I love art, so I write a lot of poetry to art. And even though you may not realize it, there are a number of ekphrastic poems in this book. Although you don't see the art, it was originally written to art.
And is that just because that that's a new term for me in the last couple of years. So can you explain a little? I know that you have elements of it in here without the art, as you say, but for people who don't know what that is, especially since it's Poetry Month, can you elucidate a little bit more on what people share when they're writing or using that container to be able to share their poetry?
Sure. Um, Ekphrastic poetry is old. I mean, it originated centuries ago. Um, and I think a lot of people say the first ekphrastic poem was actually written to sculpture, which is Ode on a Grecian Urn, which a number of us, have heard of. And it's actually written on the urn. So that is that is one kind of art. It doesn't have to be. It usually is to paintings. So you're looking at a painting and you write a poem or you write an essay or, usually we're talking about poetry here. So it's a poem to a painting, or it could be to a sculpture, or it could be to a photograph, actually. It could be more, in recent times, it could be to performance art or digital art. So the idea is not to just describe the art, but to let the art inspire you and take you to another place, even something even more personal. Now you can, as part of your poem, describe something in the painting. It's fun. I just absolutely love it because there's so many kinds of art. There's so much. I mean, there's so many different artists and forms of art. I love writing to abstract art. And a couple of my poems in my book that were done to abstract art are in the chapter on the ocean is deep. There's one called Tangled and one called We Gather at the Altar. Those were both written to abstract art. And also, you can you can use it to learn about art. So, for instance, one great technique when you're trying to write ekphrastic art is to take a painting, whether it's a landscape or a portrait, like Girl with a Pearl Earring, for instance. If you wanted to write using that as your topic, you could do some research into the history of the artist and the actual painting, and you could use elements of that in your poem. I mean, you don't have to make it historically
Mhm.
accurate, but you can use little tidbits of that when you're when you're crafting your poem, and then weave in things from your own life or someone else's life. And I think art is a wonderful prompt for poetry. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's something I love, and I teach it, and it's just I never get tired of it.
Yeah, no, it's rich with opportunity. I'm reading Mary Oliver's Blue Horses, and
Yes.
her poem on the, I don't remember if she called that poem Blue Horses, she probably did, but she talked about going into the painting and being amongst the blue horses. So that's an example.
Yes,
Okay.
that's an example.
Okay. Maybe that would be fun at the end if you read one of those.
Sure.
It sounds like you're doing, it sounds like it's a poetry book review of a of a piece of art, whether it's a painting, or something else. So that's delightful. Now I will look for those because poets don't necessarily call that out. As I said, I only became aware of that term within the last couple of years. And so thank you for educating me on what that actually means and how poets use it.
Yeah, and just quickly, there are books of ekphrastic poetry, and sometimes they will just give you the name of the art and the artist with the poem, and you can look it up online. So you can actually
Ah,
see the art and then read the poem. My book, The Clandestine Life of Paintings and Poems, I actually published the art. I had permission from the artist to publish the art, so it's actually in the book with the poems, which is easier, but it's
yeah, delightful.
pricey.
Somehow I thought that the art, when I did start tipping my toes into the water of that, I thought the art was part of it, whether it was an original piece that an artist who was both a poet and a painter did. I didn't realize that it was more this complementary piece and experience of art. So, and I'm sure there's, as you said, there's a whole range of how people express it. So that's delightful. So back to your book, when you were writing it, you touched on it a little bit in terms of how there were themes that kept coming at you, whether you kind of wanted it or not. So what did the work reveal to you about yourself that you didn't kind of know before you started?
Mm, well, one thing it revealed was that that in order to make the poetry what I wanted it to be, I had to be completely honest, and that I was okay with that, and that ultimately I was okay with being honest, and that in order to do a good job, I think I had to be honest. And I ended up being okay with that. So some of my poems are almost brutally honest. They they reveal a lot about certain relationships, and not just when I
Mhm.
was a child, but my actual ongoing relationships. And as you may have seen in the first poem in the book, or other poems. And that can be painful. The truth, as we were talking, sort of implying at least, this can be painful. So, but I think it's important, if you want to get through to yourself and get out what you want to say, but also to express to other people things that are meaningful and things that they will relate to. You have to be honest. You can't just gloss over things. You have to really put it out there. Um, and so I'm okay with that, actually. I think um, I think I'm okay with that. I mean, I have to be okay with that. I really couldn't do it any other way.
Yeah. And I really appreciated the just the heads up that, trigger warning. And certainly the reading the blurbs and whatnot, you get a flavor of, a general warning in terms of picking up the book, but then to have those reminders as you went through. And the whole thing isn't that. So you've got these joyful
No.
moments in between. But if you're not in the space to be able to um, participate in some of those, just pass over it and maybe you can come back to it later. So I think it was honoring for the reader to just let them know that this might be something that would be difficult for them. So I appreciated that. So
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you couldn't really do it any other way, because
yeah.
you just don't want to spring that kind of
Right,
stuff on
right,
people,
right,
right?
right. One of the things that I loved about the moments that you have in these poems is that you're asking us to dwell in a moment and not be judgmental, not be quick to label, but just to really like take a pause, which with as much as our attention is being bombarded all the time, even trying to take a respite to meditate or say, I'm not going to read email until noon or whatever it is, we're constantly bombarded with all of these interruptions. And I think one of the beauties of dropping into the moments of poetry is that it gets you to downshift and invites you to downshift. And so I'll read poetry in the morning after I've done my journaling with coffee before, you know, the pulse of the world kind of seeps in, unless, sometimes there are interruptions. But for the most part, to me, that is just a reminder that lets me linger a little bit longer. So can you talk about how in writing poetry and how that invites that invitation for us to dwell in a moment?
Well, I think, um, first of all, it's about choosing a moment, how you go about choosing a moment you want to write about. And that, we are apt to choose moments that we ourselves want to dwell on, or want to say something about, or feel deeply about. And so those are the things we want to talk about ourselves. And it can be, something that's more complicated. And I think one of the poems you had mentioned to me was Splitting Hairs. And can I read it because it's really
Yeah.
short?
Yes, I would love that.
Okay. Um, let's see. I think it's pretty. Oh, here it is. Splitting hairs. They say she keeps her feelings bottled up. Yes, I am a classic introvert, I suppose. However, it might be more accurate to say her feelings are like the hand grenade your crazy Uncle Joe brought back from Nam and keeps in a shoebox under the bed. Or like the ball of twine Muffy bats around the room after being dashed back and forth a few times, except when they're like hot caramel on top of an ice cream sundae or the face of a dolly clock. So, the point of sort of putting yourself into a poem like that is just that you can't just label someone as introverted and think that you know everything about them. It's more complicated than that. So be a little bit careful or think it through, a little bit, or just kind of, pause and um, think about how that person might feel if you say, now, I don't think it's an insult to be called introverted. Frankly, I've been introverted my whole life, but, just give thought to that every person has more than whatever label you might stick on them.
Yeah, I think growing up, I'd say that there was more extrovert was something that you were encouraged to do, and an introvert was like you're shy and you're not putting yourself out there. But clearly, in the last couple decades, you know, the research on what introverts have contributed, it's like we need our introverts. Not everybody could be the bossy, loud one, party goer kind of thing. So, and the
Hmm.
fact that introverts is really about how you reduce rather than how present you are in a social situation. But again, we have labels culturally that we grew up with. So I just love that. I just love that. The grenade, just the way you bounced us back and forth in terms of uh, the inner thoughts that were going on for this quote unquote introvert, which you assume might be quiet. There's a lot more going on there. So I love that. How did you select the moments and the transitions and the hard things and then decide what to include and then how to change the pace so that it wasn't just all the hard stuff at the beginning and the light stuff at the end? You kind of wove those together. So how did you make those decisions?
I have to tell you, that was really one of the most difficult
Mm.
parts of publishing a book is trying to decide what order to put your poems in and how to group them. And a friend of mine actually helped me a lot by coming up with this water theme. That is how it's organized, which is in the different chapters are Take the Plunge, Whirlpool, The Ocean is Deep, Letting the Waves Wash Over Me, and then Treading Water is the last one. And um, and I actually started out with maybe 10 or 12 different potential chapter names. Um, and then I had to sort of think about what best described my body of work that I wanted to publish. And it was still difficult because there's also sort of this unwritten rule or written rule that, excuse me, that you should put your first, like, whatever, 10 best poems out there at the beginning of the book. So I also wanted to try to do that because that's typically what people will want to read to see if they want to actually commit to this book. Um, so I kind of tried to do that as well. That's why Take the Plunge is like, here's a sample, see if you like it. And then, but it is hard because you don't want to hit someone too hard over the head with a bunch of serious, sad stuff. And I did, though, want to have that section with the trigger warning that So I did want to put all that together so people could make a decision about whether to skip it if they didn't want to read that. But then in some of the more general sections, like letting the waves wash over me, I wanted to make it a little lighter, but give it some variety. So, yeah, there were conscious decisions about how to organize within each section, for each section, and then within each section. So it was a lot of work, and it's just really hard. It's hard stuff, and you might find some things that seem incongruent, like in the last part of the book, treading water. It's because it's about life, and you have ups and downs in your life, and I have a lot of different things I care about. So I care about my family, and on the other hand, it's like if you look at my last section called Treading Water, which is kind of about many different things in my life that I care about. Excuse me, I have a poem in there called Nose Job, and that's about my sister, and which I just adore, and this experience we had together. And then I have a couple of poems like A Letter to Franz Kafka and White Buffalo, and those are two sort of environmental poems. So they're totally different. And then I have one called Dental Hygiene, which is kind of a funny poem, which is about my experience at the dentist's office, but it's like almost it's just totally humor or
Mm-hmm.
tongue in cheek. So it's just really some of it is kind of a crapshoot. And then my final poem in the book, not final, next to the last, is called Death Rose, which is about the death of my father from cancer. And how my family, some of my members of my family, my close family, reacted to that and reacted and to each other. And so that was a very tough poem to write, but I wanted to include it because it was so, it meant so much to me, and I think to them too. When I finally finished it, it took me many years and many, many drafts to
Wow, that's
put that out
encouraging.
on the page.
That's encouraging for a reality check for people who write poetry that some poems just aren't ready until they're ready. And so, um,
Oh yeah, I
you
mean,
know,
I spent that one probably the whole 5 years and
wow,
25 drafts or something. It was
wow,
originally like 10 pages and then it ended up being five. But it's
wow.
the longest poem in the book.
Well, we just by then, because it's towards the end of the book, we've we've seen you in all these different life circumstances, and you can't help but be the compassion for what's happening in all its complexity, but then to have the question, is it too late to be a real family? My brain was just off on all sorts of, it was all about you, but it's peppering different things as you're reading the poetry. And it just lingered a long time in terms of what does that mean and what relationships have, how has the family of origin and the family by choice and all of those complexities around what family means to you, in my case, what I was reading and I was thinking other people. So it was such a rich invitation to pause and dwell in what that meant, for me, and I can imagine for other people. So that was a very heartfelt, profound read, I will say, from my end.
Oh,
In a good
yeah.
way. In a good way. I mean, it was a when you watch something that is tough, and you might have a good cry or whatnot, but it feels some therapeutic sounds too trendy, but there's something in it that feels good to have experienced. And so I felt um, enriched by having read that poem. So
Oh,
thank
well,
you.
I'm glad. I'm glad because it was hard to write and I so adore my siblings and we're gonna my two sisters and I are gonna get together in April and have a girls week together. So
Nice.
that'll be really fun.
Nice.
And so that's all really going great. So it's I'm happy I put that out into the world,
Mm,
even though it's hard, and I know it's hard for everyone, and but sometimes in that way, I think death can bring people
mm,
together.
mm.
Um, as hard as it is,
Yeah,
it can be, cathartic too, and healing. It can have its own way of healing families.
yeah. Oh,
So anyway,
thank you for that.
yeah.
Do you have, with the listeners, many people are poets who are drawn to listen to it, and other people are, I'll say, closet poet wannabes, either know more about poetry, maybe they'd like to write a little poetry. So if you had any words of wisdom for people who want to learn more about poetry, where would you invite them to start?
Oh, well, read as much poetry as you can because it's always good to, just to learn. You learn so much from other poets. I mean, I can't tell you how many books of poetry I have because I just can't stop myself from buying new collections of poetry. I hear a poem or I read a poem online and it's like, oh my gosh, I really like that. But anyway, I think that, so yeah, I think it's important to read poetry, but you don't have to buy a book of poetry to read poetry. It's actually really easy. There are so many websites um, that you can find poetry on, and actually, you can um, you can sign up to get a poem a day from um, from places like well, there's one called well, I'm trying to remember now. The what is it? The big Academy of American Poets is one of them that will send you a poem a day. If you just look at, you can just look up online, poem a day. There are multiple ones. Academy of American Poets, Rattle, just like a baby's rattle. Rattle will send you a poem a day. But if you look that up, you can just start getting a poem a day in your mailbox, email box. And there's another one, but oh, and also podcasts. There are many podcasts focused on poetry. Yours has a number of poetry or podcasts with poets. Ada Limon, our
Mm,
former poet laureate, has a
mhm.
podcast called Slow Down.
Oh,
So yeah, so that's on. Is it every day or every day? Call a 5 minute dose of poetry every day. You
I
can
will take that.
get from the slowdown. There's also one called Poetry P, which is haiku focused, and I
Mm,
love haiku. I love short form poetry, especially the Japanese like haiku and tanka forms. But if you want to read some really good poetry and you're a beginner and you want to end to poetry, I always recommend Billy Collins because he is a very easy poet to break into. He's charming, he's humorous. Um, he has a book called The Trouble with Poetry, which is one of his first books of poetry, which is very easy read. And you'll fall in love with poetry just from reading that, which is one of the reasons he was one of our great poet laureates of the United States, is that he made it so easy to love poetry. And I recommend watching his YouTube videos because there he recites his poetry, and you can find other people's poetry being recited on YouTube as well. But if you don't know much about poetry and
that's a good.
whether you like it, he's a wonderful person to start with because he has some very fun and humorous poems about his dogs, about his 17-year-old daughter. So I,
That's
I just,
that's a wonderful list. I'll pepper some of that stuff, but primarily I want to make sure that I've got all the links so that people can get a hold of you at your website. So I'll post that and your social media links and where to buy the book, which I highly recommend. And people can't see on here, but there's a beautiful piece of art that's on the front of it. It's just an invitation to pick the book up. If you walk by it in a bookstore, you would pick it up. Thank you so much, Robin, for coming on the show. I am so glad to finally get a chance to meet you and to get another opportunity to get other people to know about you. So, thank you so much.
thank you, and thank you for promoting poetry.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of the Thought Echoes podcast, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend. It helps get the word out. Until next time, keep exploring the echoes that shape your world.